Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our Berwyn Candidates Forum. I'm Irene Romulo, co-founder of Cicero Independiente. It looks like my partner Al is muted right now. So we also got Alex Keefe here, politics editor at WBEZ. He's joining us live from Chicago's NPR station. Before we get too far into our programming, we do want to say that we have Spanish interpretation for today's event. You can join us by calling 312-667-4792 and then entering the code 165734. Or you can also join the Zoom link that's in the comments and then press interpretation and choose Spanish at the bottom. I'm going to repeat those same instructions in Spanish. Buenas, gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Este evento tiene traducción simultánea al español. Si quieren escucharnos ahorita en español, pueden seguir en el enlace que está en los comentarios. Así se van a oír a nuestra sala de Zoom y ahí abajo van a presionar el botón que dice interpretación. También tienen la opción de marcar el número 312-667-4792 y cuando conteste la máquina ingresar el código 165734. Otra vez el número es 312-667-4792 y también está en los comentarios.
And maybe I'm back now with the microphone. Can you hear me, Irina?
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm so sorry about that. I'm Alex Keefe. I'm joining you live from WBEZ's newsroom. I'm our politics editor, and I have a functioning microphone, which is a little mission critical to this. To explain about today's event, this is part of our Citizens Agenda project, where we're asking you, the public, what you want your elected officials to be talking about ahead of the February 23rd primary elections. So most of the questions today are coming directly from you, members of the public and Berwyn residents.
So today we're going to hear from 3 candidates on the ballot for Berwyn Mayor, City Clerk, and Township Supervisor. We invited all of the candidates who made it onto the ballot to join us today, but many didn't get back to us. We also originally invited candidates for Cicero Town President, but they weren't able to attend.
So instead of a forum today, we're going to be doing some candidate interviews for 3 of these offices. If you have a question, if you have a comment that you want us to be asking or making to the candidates, of course, you can drop them in the chat wherever you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and we're going to try to work those live comments into the event today.
So before we actually get started with the interviews, we wanted to review some basic information about voting in these elections.
So really quickly and very basically, when is election day? February 23rd, or excuse me, when and where? Early voting starts on Monday and it runs through the day before primary election day. Then of course it is the election itself.
And the election day is February 23rd. You can visit bit.ly/yourvoterinfo to find your polling location. And for one of these races, the Berwyn supervisor race, there's also going to be a Republican candidate running on the general election in April.
Who can vote? Of course, you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote. You have to be at least 18 years old, and you have to live in the district for the race in which you're voting for at least 30 days before election day. That's all according to Illinois state law. If you are registered to vote, just a heads up, you do not need identification to cast a ballot on election day. So if someone is asking you for identification when you go to vote, that should raise a red flag.
And lucky for everyone who hasn't registered, you still have until tomorrow night to register to vote online, but you can still register in person at any of the early voting locations that we listed or on election day at your polling location. Make sure you take your ID though, because to register, they will ask for that.
So if you do run into any problems, because we do live in Illinois after all, who can you contact? Well, we have several phone numbers here if you have any election irregularities. What are we talking about when we say that? If you have difficulty getting a paper ballot, if you have any issues with a translation of your ballot, if you see people handing out political materials within 100 feet of a polling place, this is called electioneering. It's also illegal by state law. Call these numbers and you can report the irregularities you see. These hotlines are staffed by attorneys who will know what to do with your reports of these irregularities.
All right, so our first interview is going to be about the Berwyn mayor's race. But before we actually get started, we just want to review real quick what the mayor does. So the mayor presides over the city council and is the chief executive officer of the city. We prepared this handy slide for you to read a little bit more about what they do.
So we're going to start our interviews today with Brendan O'Connor. He's running for mayor. Mr. O'Connor is a small business owner in Berwyn. He owns Big Guy Sausage Stand. Mr. O'Connor, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we should note we did reach out to Berwyn's incumbent mayor, Robert Lavero, multiple times. He never responded to us about participating in this forum. So today we'll just be hearing from Mr. O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor, let's start with a basic question. What do you view as the main job of the mayor of Berwyn, and why do you want it?
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I'm Brendan O'Connor. I'm running to be mayor of Berwyn. What I'm looking to do, I want to ensure that everyone in Berwyn has a seat at the table, that they have equal protection from our law enforcement and equitable representation in our city government, that their voices are heard.
Thank you. So we're going to get started with our first live question. We're going to have Pastor Tom Golke. He's a volunteer with the Cicero Berwyn Stickney Food Pantry. Join us right now.
Hey, Brendan, good to see you.
Hey.
My question for you today, as a volunteer with the Cicero Berwyn Stickney Food Pantry, is this. The founders of the CBS Food Pantry, a bunch of churches and various traditions in Cicero Berwyn and Stickney all came together to address hunger in our neighborhoods. And central to our values, of course, is the imperative to love our neighbors and care for those among us who are poor and struggling. If you're elected during this pandemic, what will you do to address the basic needs of Berwyn residents who are struggling? And how will you augment the work of organizations that are already doing that work? Thanks.
Thank you. Great question. You know, these are tough times. People are hurting. They're struggling. They're out of work. What we're looking to do is to support what's already there, bolster those services, whether they're part of our government or outside groups like yourself and Berwyn Mutual Aid, et cetera. You know, we need to support those organizations doing the hard work already, make sure they have resources, and really help them in every way, whether that's communication, whether that's financially. We also have a lot of great services that we do provide. People are out of work, right? Kids are lagging in social development from this pandemic. We need to get them out of the house as soon as we can. We need to get them into our library. When they're in the library, we want their parents to be, if they are out of work, to utilize those employment services our libraries have. You know, we have resume building, we have employment workshops at our library. That's important. We have a couple people from the township that are going to be on next. We want to partner with the township help. We want to make sure that the mental health board has the resources it needs to address the problems people are facing. And as far as just working on making sure what's there is working right and bolstering it to meet these needs, because people's mental health is an issue right now. We have domestic issues that families need help with. On top of that, it's physical health. We need to get the kids back outside. We need to support the park districts. We need to support the schools to get the kids in that social development and their physical health, out running, being kids again. So that's where our priorities are going to focus as this pandemic comes to a close.
Brendan, you talked a lot about equity. You mentioned the pandemic just a moment ago. We had lots and lots of questions about this, of course. It's affected everyone's lives. We had this from Lisa Polderman. She asked as part of our survey, what will you do to address the health and economic inequities revealed and created by COVID-19? What should city government be doing about that?
Well, one of the issues this city has is translation services are not great. Right? Our city council minutes aren't interpreted still. The city, after being called out from my campaign and other activists in the town, have finally started translating more. But we have a communication problem with this city. And we need to make sure one of the things I want to bring is central communication to the city of Berwyn so that people know about the programs that we have. And we have things addressing these. Again, we need to bolster those programs, but more than anything, we need people to understand that they're out there, that they exist, and there is already help for them, and make sure we're able to meet that need.
Thank you. We have a question now from one of your Berwyn residents. We're gonna pull that up right now. Oh, I don't think that's.
Y afroamericana.
There we go.
Mi nombre es Genoveva, soy residente de Berwyn desde hace 20 años. Como bien sabemos, nuestra comunidad ha sido una de las más afectadas por el COVID-19. Nuestra comunidad latina y afroamericana ha muerto en cifras muy alarmantes. ¿Qué plan tiene para la distribución de la vacuna en Berwyn? ¿Y cómo planean educar a nuestra gente sobre la vacuna? Ya que por falta de información y confianza hacia el gobierno y los oficiales electos, nuestra gente está escéptica y a causa de esto no se quieren vacunar. Y la dificultad también para obtener la vacuna es otro problema.
So I'll be translating that. My name is Genoveva, and I've been a Berwyn resident for 20 years. As we well know, our community has been one of the most affected by COVID-19. Black and Latinx people have died at alarming rates. What plan do you have to distribute the vaccine in Berwyn? And how do you plan to educate people about the vaccine, given that many are hesitant and don't want to get it because of government distrust and lack of information? The difficulty of getting the vaccine is yet another issue.
Great question. I mean, this is something that should be being dealt with right now in a more robust way. Getting the resources we need, the communication to our residents to sign up, to get on the list for the vaccine, working with the county, working with the state, and working right here with our township to make sure that people know what their options are and how they're gonna get there. Now, how are we gonna address these inequities that we've seen, like COVID has just made so glaringly obvious? A lot of these are societal. A lot of them are right here in our backyard that we can start taking a look at. But definitely making sure that we're reaching these underrepresented, marginalized communities and getting the resources to them to say, hey, one, you got a PR issue with the vaccine. So getting in front of that as Berwyn mayor, getting the vaccine myself, getting my family vaccinated, and just showing there's nothing to be scared of. That could be a great start to show that, and getting the facts in front of them from people that represent them, right? Not just from local government, people I can identify with as well in these communities that don't have that representation. So there's a PR issue, there's a communication issue, and then there's a logistical issue. And that comes with working with the township board of health, and the county to make sure we get the vaccine here to Berwyn and accessible. The other thing we have is we also have seniors who don't have internet. So they need to be called and they need rides. I'm out knocking doors every single day. And that is the thing, the seniors, they have no information. People need to be calling them, telling them, look, here's the story. We're going to get you on the list. We're going to sign you up right now. I'll let you know when your number comes up and we'll find a ride for you. And I haven't heard any talk from our local government on that. There are a lot of seniors without internet and without cars. We also need to be focusing on that.
Yeah, thanks for the response. We got another pandemic-related question. In November, Mayor Lovero announced that the city would not write citations for businesses that disregarded Governor Pritzker's order to close indoor dining. Will you enforce future COVID restrictions?
I'm definitely going to listen to the medical experts, the infectious disease experts on this. That's not my background. It's not my place to subvert what they say. I took a hard stance against the mayor when that happened. And being a restaurant, this pandemic restaurant, sorry, I am a restaurant owner. So this does impact me and it impacts my peers who I'm good friends with. And it's hard, it's divisive, but a wink and a nod policy, like we saw from our mayor, that's not acceptable. We've had enough of that for the last 4 years in the White House, not taking medical and scientific fact. And you're not going to get that with my administration. We're going to listen to the experts.
And how do you, just to follow up, how do you strike that balance? I mean, you're a small business owner. How do you strike the balance between keeping your business alive, particularly restaurants, which are struggling mightily right now, while also containing the pandemic with its variants and with the numbers we've been seeing? How do you, what do you say to restaurant owners who hear what you're saying and they say, well, this looks like, potentially 6 more months of putting us in the tank?
Well, it's a tough balance. I think the key word of 2020 was pivot, right? We have to be creative. As a restaurant owner, people ask me, what makes you qualified to run for mayor? You own a restaurant? Well, I've owned a restaurant for 10 years. You have to be a leader. You have to be a good employer. You have to understand the benefits involved in that, but you also have to be a communications expert. You have to be a marketing expert. These are things that back in the day, the mom and pop, flipped burgers and took orders. People showed up, maybe ran an ad in the newspaper. It's not like that right now. We have 5 other companies that are subcontractors with us, from Grubhub to DoorDash to Uber Eats, that we're always managing, et cetera. And it's taking advantage of that technology, but also not being taken advantage of by that technology. I think the city can offer these kinds of resources and information to our mom and pop so they know what their options are, how they can subvert some of these fees, and how they can get business through the door on a carry-out basis or a limited dining capacity when it's allowed. There is so much out there, so many predatory companies, and the city should be working towards that. Now, one of my plans when the mayor did this wink and nod policy that was referenced in the last question was, and it kind of goes to the pastor's question, what are we doing for these nutritional programs and stuff? A lot of these families that are getting these nutritional, these programs, they work. And it would be, I'm sure they would love a hot carry out meal. So I was saying, we got $1.6 million in CARES, 800,000 that went to housing, the other 800,000 the city spent on overtime for our police. So, I thought we could have used that as, in part, for carryout vouchers to support our mutual aid groups, et cetera, to get hot meals to these families while their parents are coming home from work, and et cetera. And that can support both our most vulnerable residents and our mom and pop shops. But nobody listened to me on that one. But I thought it was a great idea. So it just takes creative thinking, and that's what's going to guide this process. It's going to be input from residents, and it's going to be just creative, forward thinkers coming up with great ideas that are going to help navigate this, because this is unprecedented, and the old school thought process of business as usual is not going to be what suits us best.
If you're just joining us, we're hearing from Brendan O'Connor, a candidate for Berwyn Mayor. If you have a question for the candidates today, please do drop them in the comments section of Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching, and we'll try to work them into our event today. Brendan, let's switch gears. I want to talk about fiscal issues, particularly property taxes. We got a lot of questions about property taxes. People worried they could lead to an exodus from Berwyn. One woman in our survey called them suffocating. First off, very basically, can you vow right now not to raise property taxes if you're elected?
I mean, that's what I'm campaigning on. I'm not going to take some kind of vow where we're going to be facing some really hard issues. So I don't want to be disingenuous, because I don't have all the facts in front of me, because we have a government that doesn't have the transparency that we need for me as a general member of the public to make those decisions, right? So, I don't want to take some hardline stance that I might have to backtrack either, but I'm going to do everything I can to not raise the taxes. And that starts with, we have a police chief who has 8 family members on the city payroll. There's more family members in the districts surrounding this city, but he has a brother who contracts with the city for the tune of $600,000 in roofing inspections. Okay, one of the things we're going to do, we're going to bring an IG and into this city to review all departments, department heads. We're going to have participatory budgeting from the community, and we're going to have a certified city manager who's going to run the nuts and bolts, someone who has the education and the experience to do that. Okay, and I'm going to run this city as a council management form of government and not as a strong mayor. I think taking all of those things is also one of the things. Our credit rating's been downgraded due to weak management. So bringing those processes,
Mhm.
those accountabilities to Berwyn, we're going to get our credit rating up. All these things are going to help in the sense of eliminating waste and keeping us from having to raise your taxes. But again, we're facing huge shortfalls, and we're talking about decades and decades, generations of can kicking in this town. Okay, so we do have to deal with that. Every man, woman, and child has a $5,300 debt on their head who's living in Berwyn. We're going to have to address that in some way, and I'm going to do everything I can to avoid. We're not even talking about bankruptcy. We're not talking about any of these. We need to face it head on and start chipping away at it every way we can.
We got super quick.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Irene.
All right. Sandra Cervanka asked in our survey, how can long-term residents of a community stay in their homes while taxes are rising around them? She adds that she doesn't qualify for senior assistance and makes just a little too much for other assistance. So she's wondering how you would help people like her.
I mean, hey, Sandy, how are you? I know Sandy, she's a great customer of mine. The idea here is, like I was just touching on, we have to do everything we can to meet a budget every year without acquiring new debt and raising taxes in the future. As far as there are plenty of people that fall into that middle where they make a little too much, but at the end of the day, they're right there at the lower end. Because they're not receiving these resources and these programs. So, we can look at these programs, we can see what the qualifications are, we can make it in effect where inflation is right now, and maybe raise the bar on some of those things, because there are people that need them who are working, and God knows here in Berwyn, we have working poor. And I am here for the working poor, and we're going to do everything we can to represent them and make sure that if you work, you shouldn't be poor, and you should be able to afford your bills. You shouldn't be waking up in cold sweats, worrying about paying your electric bill, your heat. And so we're here for you. And those are things that we're going to focus on. And Sandy, we're going to get your input on this when we win this race. And we want to hear your thoughts and your ideas, because we're all about bringing everybody to the table and making their voices heard. So thanks for the question.
Well, we got lots of questions about property taxes and the quality of education in Berwyn, but we think this recorded question pretty much sums up what we heard.
Hi, my name is Dory Mayfield and I live in South Berwyn. My property taxes are high, but the schools in the area often have low test scores. I wanted to see what could be done to improve the schools without raising my property taxes. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a community effort. It doesn't just start with a mayor. It doesn't start with a school board. Now, the schools are out of the purview of the mayor, right? But the mayor can support the school district, right? Right now, our town is an autocracy. The mayor has his thumb on the scale for every committee and every school board here in Berwyn. Okay, so let's just be clear about that. We need good people to run for office, and we need civic engagement in this town. So it's a little late this time around, but we need more people to run for office and make better decisions. Here in North Berwyn, we're seeing the test scores go up. In South Berwyn, they were drastically underfunded, and they did get the funding they need. And I'm hopeful that that's going to, and it did raise people's taxes. So I'm sorry about that, but at least on the bright side, we're going to have smarter kids as a result. And I'm hoping that is what happens. So if it's being managed right with the more funding that we have in the South School District right now, as the years go on, we can see the results of that funding, retaining our good teachers and getting more resources to those students.
And we have just a couple quick budget related questions before we move on to stick with our time schedule here today. First off, just very quickly, what is your position on gambling and slot licenses here in Berwyn? This comes from Adrian Alvarado on Facebook.
I think that mom and pop restaurant bars that actually are great places and have their own draw deserve to have that extra money come into their place by having some machines in the corner. But do I think that standalone shops that employ one person per day and have some guy sitting there blowing the disability check and that's their customer base for an entire day? No, I don't think those are great for the community. I don't think that when you have a quaint downtown area and every other building has slots plastered across the windows against code is great for bringing new residents and and good businesses that would have their own draw to that area. So no, I think standalones are a big problem. And if you look at my opponent's donation record, let me tell you, his favorite donors are gambling companies. So.
And then another quick question on Facebook before we get to the end. We had, looks like Martha is asking us, running a sausage stand to being a mayor is a big jump when we're talking about, especially dealing with a multi-million-dollar budget. What makes you qualified for this?
Well, so maybe my opponent has more governmental experience, but I have a moral compass. Right now here in Berwyn, it's not a matter of what's right and wrong. It's the culture is how much can I get away with? Okay, so that's what needs to change. I'm talking about bringing a city manager. I'm talking about bringing an IG in there because I will need help. Okay, and we're going to see those positions free up a lot more money than they're going to cost us. So, yeah, as far as the nuances of running a city government, I'm going to do my research. I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to be there for the people of Berwyn. But as far as experience, my opponent's been in city council since 1982. We have $330 million in debt. He's kicked the can every way of the road. I don't see how I could do better because the bar is so low. So that's where I'm at. But no, we're going to do everything we can. We're going to surround ourselves with smart people. My opponent wants everybody around him to not be as smart as him. I'm looking to be the dumbest guy in the room and have really great intellectuals surrounding me and taking their advice from the experts.
Okay, well, thank you. Our last question for all of the candidates today is, what does Berwyn look like in the next 50 years for you?
50 years of Berwyn. I see Berwyn right now, everyone talks about the diversity. So I want to keep that. I don't want to, just gentrify this city. And I think that is what the current administration is looking to solve all the problems simply by gentrifying the area. Because we have a lot of great things that make Berwyn poised for gentrification. We're close to downtown. We have a great housing stock, right? But we want Berwyn to support its residents now. We want those residents' kids to grow up and want to return home. We want them to want to run for office. We want them to volunteer. We want them to be engaged and raise their kids and call this home and be proud of this home. We all love Berwyn. We all love our residents, but our government is embarrassing. And so that's where we need to fix it. And we need to think about, what is 10, 20, 50 years down the line. And that also comes with our business community and supporting independent businesses in this town and not just offering tax incentives to the largest businesses in this town. Because I know from running a little sausage shop here on Roosevelt Road that these little mom and pops, these are a place of pride for our residents. And that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the big car dealership on the road of their friends. They're excited to come here and try this place and go to this great music venue and hit Fitzgerald's up, hit the Friendly Tap up. And so these are the places that people really care about. And we need to nurture our mom and pop independent restaurants, bar owners, and professional services in this town.
All right, Mr. O'Connor, thank you so much for joining us today. Brendan O'Connor is running to be the next mayor of Berwyn. We'll note again that we did invite Mayor Robert Lovero to our event today, but he didn't get back to us about participating. Thank you.
And just a reminder that Spanish interpretation, live interpretation for this event is available either on Zoom or on the hotline. You could find details for this in the chat.
Otra vez queremos recordar que este evento tiene interpretación al español. Pueden encontrar los detalles en los comentarios, se pueden unir en el enlace en Zoom o llamar al número de teléfono que está listado. For our next segment, we're actually going to be talking to the person running for Berwyn City Clerk's race. Before we do that, let's just have a brief look at what this job is all about. So basically, it's the clerk's job to maintain public records and monitor elections. She's also the township clerk, and in this case, she's also the president of the Public Board of Health. This morning, we're going to be hearing from Margaret Paul, who is the current city clerk. Ms. Paul was elected in 2017 and was an alderman before that. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll note again that in this race, we invited both of Ms. Paul's challengers to the ballot, Jacqueline Lopez and Berwyn Alderman Raf Avila, and neither of them responded to our invitation despite multiple attempts to reach them. So we're going to start with a basic question that was actually inspired by some surveys that we found from the Activist Toolkit. It notes that Berwyn residents have expressed confusion about the different roles of the city and the township, especially during the pandemic with the importance of the health department. Briefly, could you help us understand the distinction and what your roles are as city clerk, township clerk, and president of the Board of Health?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, thank you very much for inviting me to this, to have this opportunity. It is confusing, and I have to tell you, when I first ran for this office in 2017, I was confused. It's only been in the very last year and a half that I can see clearly what the role of clerk has to be. First of all, the Township of Berwyn and the Public Health District are actually two separate governmental units. And so whoever sits in my seat as city clerk sits in three different units of government. So the Public Health District is 100 years old as of 2020. It was founded right after the Spanish flu pandemic that we had 100 years ago. So it's interesting that we are being called on in this important time. As city clerk, our ordinances give me those roles automatically. And so oftentimes people who run for the office don't realize the amount of work that it does take to be the city clerk. Usually when we're not in a pandemic, the role of city clerk, township clerk, and as a health board secretary is just to make sure that the minutes of all the meetings are taken down accurately. The clerk serves as an archivist to make sure that all of the important records of the city, all the contracts, are kept and at hand. The clerk also serves as the Freedom of Information Officer for all three entities. And so that's an important aspect of the job when it comes to governmental transparency. It is confusing, and many people, the township offices are just a block away. And the architecture of the office isn't much distinguishable from City Hall. And so many times people feel that the township office and the health district are a part of the city government. And it's, when you're not in a pandemic and you're just offering a very few basic services from the township or the health district, you can be taken as just a department of the city. Oftentimes too, because the township and the health district have had very a small number of staff, they didn't really have the type of vision or the people on hand to develop programming, and they would enter into mutual intergovernmental agreements with the city and just almost act like a foundation where we would help to finance city programs. And so that also caused a lot of confusion about what the separate roles were. So during the pandemic, though, the health district has been called on by Mayor Lavero to be more strenuous in our efforts to assist Berwyn residents. And so we've really stepped that up. I hope I answered that question. Yes.
Yeah, Clerk, I want to talk about that. Wearing your health board hat of the three that you wear. We got, as we mentioned with Mr. O'Connor, we got a lot of questions about COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put some of these to you as well. This one from Ana Torres, who we're also going to be hearing from live later. She asks, how will you ensure that Berwyn residents most impacted by COVID have equitable access to the vaccine?
Yes, that's a difficult thing to do. I can tell you that I took over the health district. The health district is an interesting animal. First, you have to understand how it's governed, right? So the township supervisor gets a seat on the health board. The township assessor gets a seat on the health board. And then the Berwyn city clerk gets a seat on the health board. So there really are only three of us. And in the future, what I would recommend is that while these three seats are prescribed by state statute, we also open it up to have residents sit with us to expand the board so that we can get input. Now, to answer your question, everybody is scrambling for the vaccine. We don't, from the federal government, we haven't had a lot of direction, and we haven't had a lot of vaccine doses to pass around. The state of Illinois is struggling. We have applied to be a vaccination site at the Berwyn Health District. We haven't gotten the green light or any of the vaccine yet to do that. We hope to have that soon, but until there's a steady supply and a sufficient supply, we're going to be like a regular doctor's office in terms of what we can do.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, going forward, you mentioned what sounds like a restructuring of that health body. Do you think that should be its own thing with full-time people instead of maybe 3 board members who are also wearing other hats in different departments of government?
Well, usually the supervisor, the township supervisor, has acted as the principal executive officer for both the township and the health district. And it's been very difficult. I have proposed that we do have a full-time office person that would take care of the day-to-day, that would allow the supervisor and the township district board to work on programming and to try to bring those new programs that meet the daily needs of our residents to the forefront. But we have been understaffed, and we just have to grow. In the past, during the last financial meltdown in 2009, you heard companies say, the financial institutions were too big to fail. Sometimes I have thought that the health district and township were too small to succeed. And maybe in the future, hopefully, with particularly Erica Corona Owens being in charge as supervisor, we'll be able to do that.
Solamente quiero dejar saber a las personas que quieran dejarnos una pregunta en español, la pueden dejar en los comentarios y también podemos incluirlas. O si tienen preguntas en español para personas que estén escuchando, pueden dejarlas en los comentarios. All right, so as you've already mentioned, you've sat on the Public Board of Health during this pandemic. What grade would you give yourselves for how you've handled things?
Oh gosh. Initially, I'm not pandering, but I first became very aware of the pandemic by listening to WBEZ. There was a news report, a reporter in Lombardo, Italy, talking about what was going on there and how their hospitals were full. And I have to say, back in January of 2020, the health district should have been given a grade of F. I have been working very hard to make sure that the health district is responding. I mean, we have the words public health chiseled in stone above our front door. And so we have to really make sure that we are leading the way. In our discussions, what I have been able to do is I brought the first drive-up COVID testing to Berwyn, and now the city through the Unified Command is doing that almost on a weekly basis. The Berwyn Health District has partnered with Circle, which is an organization of volunteer doctors out of Loyola Medical Center, and now we're having COVID testing every Friday. And the main focus on that are our neighbors who are unemployed, who don't have health insurance, and particularly the Hispanic community who are underserved and often are in essential lines of employment. And we don't ask for identification, we don't ask for insurance, so we have that available. We hope to be a vaccination site so that we can continue our work with our neighbors. We have a list right now of 150 people who are mostly senior citizens who are homebound and actually can't, even if they could get an appointment through the Cook County website, can't get there. And so we have a nurse on staff who's willing to go into the homes in order to vaccinate people at their home. We're just trying to do all kinds of things that we can think of. As small as we are, we're taking on a very large pandemic, and we hope to be able to meet the needs of our neighbors. One of the things that we failed to do right away was to let our neighbors know how serious the problem was in Berwyn. And so I started my own Facebook page where I daily update other neighbors about how many people have died in Berwyn because of COVID and how many people have been affected by it. So we are right now standing at 100 Berwyn neighbors who have passed away directly because of COVID-19, and more than 6,000 people here in Berwyn have had, have suffered through COVID. So I'm constantly, linking people to the site, letting them know where they go. But again, we need to take on more staff. We were not, the health district was not among the governmental entities that were allowed any kind of the federal funding that came out maybe around June through the county and the state. But we were able to apply to FEMA. And so we are approved to receive FEMA funds, but that only comes back to us once the pandemic is under control. So,
Clerk Paul, just two really quick questions that we're getting on social media today before we move on. Sherry asks, quick yes or no questions. Can Berwyn have a stationary vaccine site that prioritizes Berwyn residents to get the vaccine before non-residents?
At this particular time, no, because vaccine sites are controlled by Illinois Department of Public Health and through Cook County. So we're in Region 10. Suburban Cook County is under the control of Cook County Public Health Department. And so they are really the ones who determine whether or not Berwyn can have its own standalone site. Mm-hmm. What's going to occur that most people don't realize is that through the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and the federal government, there is a huge plan about vaccinating all of our citizens in the United States. Unfortunately, we don't have the product. We don't have enough, whether it's the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is not yet approved. So there are a couple other vaccines that are in the works, but they're not online yet. And so we do have a vaccination site that's in North Riverside, but getting an appointment is just horrendous. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to say yes or no. I'm sorry, that was lengthy.
You did say no at the very beginning.
I apologize. Go ahead.
All right, so we're going to switch gears a bit because we have this question from Chris who asked, what will you do as an elected official to increase transparency, especially for people who don't use Facebook? And how will you root out corruption?
Well, that's not a yes or no question. Okay, so interestingly, as city clerk, in my role, I'm the Freedom of Information Act officer and also the one in charge to make sure that all of the meetings, whether or not they're city council meetings, township meetings, are conducted under the Open Meetings Act as required by the state of Illinois. And I'm a lawyer by education and training. And so I work to understand all the nuances of the Open Meetings Act and the Freedom of Information Act. And so it's been my work for the last 4 years to make sure. I have one employee at the city, a deputy clerk. She's wonderful, Sandra Anderson. And she and I have worked to really professionalize that aspect of the clerk's office. And so there have been times where I've had to balance the requirements that residents need in terms of getting a hold of records held by the city, and also the requirements of time and efficiency that the city has. I mean, there are some people who ask us for 20 or 30 years worth of records, and it really is kind of you wonder what they need that for, but you don't ask questions about why they need it. You just try to figure out how you can get those records to them. And so in terms of transparency, that's the most important part, rooting out corruption. As city clerk, you really aren't able to root out corruption. You can make sure that you conduct the office as ethically as you possibly can, and also making sure that those sunshine laws put into place through the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act are thoroughly adhered to by all city departments. And so when people can see how the meetings are conducted, when they can see how, and they can get their hands on the records that they need, that roots out corruption. When you can open the blinds and let people see what government officials are doing.
Thank you. So speaking about the Freedom of Information Act request, when I reached out to you initially to get a list of the candidates that were going to be on the ballot, you asked me to file a Freedom of Information Act request. And
Yes.
This is basic public information that most other governments actually just post online, and residents and journalists aren't required to go through the onerous and time-consuming process of filing such a request. So what was your reasoning for that?
Well, I'm sorry that you think that it's onerous and time consuming. One of the things that we have made sure that we do is that we treat everybody on equal footing. And so when we get a request for a record, whether it's a record, of course, is defined under the Freedom of Information Act as anything written, anything videoed, anything recorded. We make sure that we treat everyone, and that we have some aldermen in the city of Berwyn who usually they say that when you're an alderman that you have access to every record that we possibly have in the city, right? And there are some departments that will try to obstruct whether or not aldermen get the records that they're looking for. And so I have told them that, if they file a Freedom of Information Act, the clock starts running, right? And then we have 5 business days to answer and provide those records or request another 5-day extension. And so that starts the timer. And that way we have a legitimate way to put pressure on different departments to make sure that those records are provided. So I make sure that that rule is done fairly across the board, whether or not you're on the mayor's team or not. Everybody puts in a request for a record, and so I do that for everybody. We answered more than 700 Freedom of Information Act requests, and that's so that we have actually a written record, and the person asking for the record can see that we processed it in the way. I'm sorry that you felt that it was time consuming for you.
Clerk Paul, our last question we're asking of all Berwyn candidates today. To your mind, what does Berwyn look like 50 years from now?
Oh, that's a great question. I really started to think about that when you asked that from Mr. O'Connor. 50 years. With this pandemic, I can hardly envision what Berwyn looks like in 6 months to a year. But the economic and health impact that this pandemic is bringing to us, it's unimaginable. But one thing that I wanted to, that I thought I would bring up is in 50 years, what I would like to see. So Berwyn is, in 50 years, is going to be more than 165 years old. And our infrastructure in terms of fresh water delivery will be 100 years old or more at that point. And what I would like to see in Berwyn, as the president of the health district, is that all of the water lines delivering fresh water to residents will have been switched out so that none of the water is delivered through lead line water. I'm originally from Detroit, and so the horrible thing that happened to people who lived in Flint has raised awareness about the impact that lead has on children, on families, and so that's something that we can look to do and work with the city to do. So in 50 years, I'd like to see everybody have fresh, clean water. Thanks.
Thank you.
Clerk Margaret Paul, thank you so much for making the time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll note again that we did invite Clerk Paul's challengers to join us at today's event, but they did not respond to our invitations.
So for our last race today, we're going to talk about the Berwyn Township Supervisor position. It's kind of wonky, but basically this is what they're in charge of. The supervisor is in charge of the city's finances and is the township's chief executive officer. We're going to welcome Erica Corona Owens, who's running for Berwyn Township Supervisor. Ms. Corona Owens, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for allowing this platform to occur and giving the opportunity to the candidates and to the voters to see who they have as the leaders that want to take Berwyn to the next level.
Thank you. Once again, we're going to note that we did reach out to the other candidates in this race, Berwyn Assessor David Avila, and he did not respond to our multiple invitations to participate. So our first question to you, what do you see as the core duties of a township supervisor, and what makes you want this job?
Sure. So just to start with a little bit of background, I've worked with townships and health districts previous to coming to Berwyn to be the director of chamber services. My job before for 8 years was to bring mentoring programs, youth service programs to organizations, to school districts, to communities across 3 counties, across 2 states. So a lot of the work that I needed to do was to come into a community and identify key players to be able to create programs that were sustainable. So we'd go to health district meetings, we'd go to townships, and we say, you know, when you support programming in the community, you're building healthy communities, but you need to know that you can't just support them 1 year and expect for there to be a change. It has to be sustainable. So what I see the work of the township is I keep referring to it in a lot of the diagrams and paperwork that I've shared with the community is that they are the CEO of the health and human services of Berwyn. They're here to provide access to resources to allow you to live a better existence. So that's access to general assistance funding, that's access to mental health services, that's access to medical health services through different partnerships. So I've had conversations through my chats about what makes healthy communities. You need to talk about social determinants of health. And the leader of this position has direct impact on how to build that in this community. Does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On your note, talking about public health, we certainly have a lot of questions about the pandemic. I want to return to one we asked to Mr. O'Connor from the CBS Food Pantry in Cicero. They asked, if you're elected in the middle of this pandemic, what will you do to address the basic needs of Berwyn residents who are currently struggling, and how will you augment the work of groups that are already doing this type of work?
Thank you. I love that question because it's so essential. A lot of my platform has been, in order to carry our community forward, you need to realize that, yes, you have elected officials, but you have so many key people in this community that have kept us going and surviving and giving the resources directly to the people. So the past 2 years, I've spent working with our nonprofit leaders to say, I have a vehicle to be able to put out information in various ways, from small businesses to community members. What do you have that I can take and voice that in as many ways that I can, so people know that these resources are available to them? Just like they want to know what Taco Tuesday is, they should know, where do you get, and it's funny, but at the same time, it's not, because you should normalize access to some of these programs, citizenship, access to vaccination, access to medical, access to mental health. And we have to do that. So the question right now, specifically regarding the food pantry, I had the honor of meeting one of the women that's part of the same food pantry co-op initiative. I was knocking on her block. And one of the things that this woman said is that, yes, we've got food coming in, but one of the issues that we have is getting the food to the people. And in the dead of winter in Chicago, you can't assume that people are going to line up to receive food. A good example of getting services directly to people, I've seen the YMCA do the senior choice market, where it's literally a drive up, you get the food that you need, and you drive out. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that we can mobilize our food pantries, if we can provide services of, what are the days that we can get the food to the community members that need it the most? Mm-hmm. How do we normalize that people need some of these foods and services? I'm part of a lot of the mom groups, and one of the things that we dialogue about is that the we're receiving, milk, we're receiving, things as part of being part of the school district. But oftentimes people see receiving that food as like, oh, well, because, whether you're poor or low income, those services are there for you. No, as a working parent, you oftentimes don't have access or the ability to prepare meals. That go access those services. I'll tell you this, where my mom lives in the 5th Ward, she lives among many seniors, many of them that can't leave their home. So my mom goes to these food pantries. My mom goes to the YMCA to pick up food, and she's dropping off gallons of milk in the 5th Ward to neighbors. Elected officials need to know that. If you know your community, you know what their needs are.
We've been talking, some of the needs that you're talking about have certainly been heightened during the pandemic, and much more for certain groups than others. We have another live question about COVID-19. We've heard a few questions from Ana Torres, and she asked this of us.
Hi, so I'm a resident of the 1st Ward and a member of the Berwyn Cicero Mutual Aid Group. And COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting our Black and Latinx communities. And Berwyn has a large Latinx population, and I've yet to see a politician address how they are providing extra resources for these communities. So what do you plan to do?
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent question, especially, as a Latina in this community. I do speak both languages and I have access to find information. Many of the past candidates had said access to information is important. Not everybody's on Facebook, not everybody's on social media. One of the biggest things that I've done, I'm a person of action. What I've done right now has worked to translate critical information regarding the pandemic. So one of the things that people do not know is that when mandates come down from the state, to get that information translated into Spanish oftentimes takes 10 days. So when you open on a Friday and you switch from phase 4 to phase 3 or tier 1 to tier 2, the people that are left behind are people that do not speak the language. So one of the things that I did is I've been advocating for our small businesses for information to be translated, or I've just translated it myself. Other things that I've done is created PSAs that I can push out through social media. But one of the things that is important is that aside from the pretty of, social media or written stuff, you need to go to who's serving the community right now. So 3 years ago, it was actually, my opponent who asked me, what work can we do to advocate outreach in the Latino community? He knew the work that I was doing before, or maybe he didn't. He found out through my response to him is that if you truly want to serve the Latino community, which is what you stand behind, you need to go to where they are. Where are they? Who do they trust? They trust their church. They trust their community centers that are there, regardless of whether or not a politician is running for office. You need to go to where they are. You need to create events that not only promote cultural diversity, but also have the resources that people need to live a better existence in their own community. So outreach, direct outreach, meeting people where they are is the only way that we're going to get information to who needs it the most.
All right, so as you heard earlier today, we've got a lot of questions and a lot of concerns from residents about rising property taxes with declining services. So how would you address these concerns over property taxes if you're elected?
Yeah, so part of the work that I do, and I've talked to some of the individuals that are the great candidates that are running for office. One of the jobs that I do currently is I oversee the Why Berwin marketing campaign. I took over that 2 years ago, 2018 to 2019. That campaign has brought community members to Berwyn. Some can afford the $500,000 homes, some can't. One of the things that I've done is that, we have to be mindful of what the impact of this campaign is doing to our existing residents. Having worked in other communities, what makes a viable and sustainable community is access to resources. So we have individuals that can't afford their taxes, but do they know that they can appeal those taxes? I'll tell you this personal story. You know, it wasn't until I started working in this community that my own parents that live in Berwyn didn't know about appealing their taxes, that was an option to them, that was something that took 10 minutes for them to do, and it was an opportunity. Instead, like many Latino seniors that receive predatory mailings that say, hey, we can reduce your property taxes. For years, my own parents were sending in that check, $150 for somebody to help them appeal their taxes. That's wrong. That's not right. That goes back to access to information for the people that need it the most. So
Just had a quick follow-up question we wanted to ask from someone on Facebook. Lisa asks Erica, will you help make the General Assistance Fund more accessible to residents?
yes. So this is one of the things that, so when I decided to run, the way I function is information to make informed decisions, give people the opportunity. So I literally, because I want to be prepared for what questions would come, I have my financial binder of you know, how money has been spent over the past few years. And yes, there is general assistance funding. One of the things that I have as part of my platform is, how do people know that that's an opportunity for Berwyn? You know, right now with the amount of job loss that's happened, one of the things that I continue to understand is that, okay, general assistance is meant for individuals that do not qualify for unemployment, are in a pipeline to receive other funds. And to me, I say, and I started reading the details, I said, well, you know, how do people know that they're stuck in the middle and that they don't qualify? One of the things that I have as part of my platform is I want to be able to bring in, to find the funding, pull funding from the current existing budget to hire someone that is the social worker, that is part of the Berwyn Township. I sit on the library board. Some of the things that we talk about is that, you know, we have residents that seek the library, you know, that whether it be they have mental health needs that are identified, or they have financial instability that staff becomes aware of. One of the things that I said is that if we had a social worker that existed within our community that could play that role of, hey, you know, I have financial insecurity, I have, you know, so many of these other pieces, where do I go to do the sign up for some of these federal, state, local programs? You know, I want that to exist at the township. As much as I want to be the person to do that, I also understand that there's a legal and ethical obligation. I cannot and I will not be the person, you know, that is asking you, let me get your social security number and fill out this information. We need to have somebody that is qualified to do that and get those resources to the people. So that's my perspective, is hiring someone and elevating and announcing as much as I can, go to the township. Some of the projects and some of the initiatives that I have to be able to change the culture and how the township is viewed is, you know, is part of how I've done my campaign. I want to have these medical conversations. I want to have conversations about social issues in a way that is open for people to ask. If you don't ask, you don't know. So I want to bring that lens over to the township. Can we use that park that the township owns to better use it? I understand my opponent wants to do farmers markets, but what's been the cost of it? Can we rotate the use of that public space to have open forums and conversations? Can it be used for that? I think so, because having conversations about social issues leads to healthier communities.
Thank you. So we got another question. This one's from Katie Sullivan. She says, Berwyn's budget has struggled with debt and credit downgrades. Specifically, what would you cut from Berwyn's budget to bring it in line?
The city of Berwyn's budget, as my personal opinion, or are you asking about the township?
Both.
Okay. So right now, when it comes to the township budget, we're strong financially, you know, in terms of there's money there. The money exists a lot right now in the fund that is the health district. That's in the health district. So there's money there. My piece is, before we start asking for more money, let's activate the use of that money responsibly. Let's show the taxpayers that, you know, because there are so many people that oftentimes say, get rid of the township, get rid of the 2% that's being removed from my taxes. And I say, if you remove that 2%, you get it back, but then who is going to do the social service aspect of this community? So for me, I don't believe at this point to increase the taxes for the health district or the township. We need to use the money and prove to our community that the money's being used to serve them. When it comes to the city, what we would eliminate, let's take a look at what's been the output across departments. I know that it's unpopular to say, well, you have to cut the fat, but where I come from a perspective in the nonprofit sector, that if you've not proved value or return on investment, why do you exist, or why do we have you? For me, it's really hard to say, without looking at the finances of each department, not who do you eliminate, but where's the fat that isn't producing, to give the services to our community. So I know that that's not probably the answer that you want to hear in terms I'm sure people want to hear, well, what department specifically? Let's look at who's actually been contributing to make Berwyn a better community for us.
Mrs. Corona Owens, stepping back a little bit, the last question that we'll ask you that we've been asking all candidates, to your mind, what does Berwyn look like 50 years from now?
Yeah, so we really do a good job of touting, diversity and inclusion, and, come to Berwyn because, you are welcomed. What 2020 did was elevate so much, so many conversations and feelings from residents that, the moment you said how you felt, or that you didn't feel like you belonged, even though you were allured to come to this community, you were marked and you were silenced. The number of people that I continue to hear from that say, Erica, I have my opinions of how I exist here and how I don't feel like I belong, but I can't tell that to anybody because then I'm marked as someone that doesn't love Berwyn. I love Berwyn, but there's so much progress that still needs to happen. One of the things that I'd like to build is, can we have dialogue, of how we're not, as elected officials, doing our jobs to the extent that we're serving our community without feeling attacked. And this is what is so bizarre to me, and I don't understand it, is that in any job that you have, you get a review, and you should get a review more than just every 4 years. Where is that review process here? So what I want to see, in 50 years from now is that there is these lines of communication from our community to our elected officials to say, hey, you know what, Erica, I don't believe in that program. Those are my tax dollars. Why wasn't I brought to the table? Marge Paul, mentioned, could we create the health district, a committee that gives input on how these services and these dollars are being used? Hey, that's a good idea. If we are here to serve our community, how the hell do we know that we're doing a good job? The only way you're doing a good job, and this is my perspective as a new candidate looking in, is that, well, you find out you did a good job because you get reelected. I'm like, no, you can't wait for years to find out whether or not you're doing a good job. And that's my perspective.
All right. Well, thank you, Mrs. Corona Owens. Thank you so much for joining us today, making the time. We'll note again that we did reach out to the other candidate on the ballot in this race, Berwyn Assessor David Avila, and he did not respond to our multiple invitations to participate. So that's it for our event today. Thank you everybody for watching and submitting your questions to the survey and right now on social media. There's going to be a recording that you can watch on our Facebook pages at Cicero Independiente and WBEZ. So make sure to share that with anybody who wasn't able to join us today. And, we talked a lot about translation services and the need to have information in languages other than English. That is exactly why we started Cicero Independiente. So you can follow our coverage of public affairs and the pandemic in Spanish at ciceroindependiente.com and also at wbez.org/español.
Also, thank you to Hearken Election SOS Initiative for financially supporting our Spanish interpretation for this event. A huge thank you, as always, so much to Catalina Maria Johnson. She's doing live interpretation for this. Catalina also has a Spanish language show, Beat Latino, every Sunday on Vocalo 89.5 FM in Chicago. I highly recommend you check it out. Thank you so much for your hard work, Catalina. And thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.